Charlie Kirk came into the hearing certain he was untouchable. Backed by Turning Point's brand, with cameras rolling, he looked ready to steamroll critics. But then Jasmine Crockett leaned forward. Calm, unshaken, she dropped a financial detail that hit like a thunderclap. Kirk's confidence evaporated. He lost it. Live in front of the nation. Like and subscribe. And tell me, where are you watching from? Charlie Kirk thought the hearing was just another stage. Lights, cameras, his message polished for prime time. But while he basked in the spotlight, Jasmine Crockett was already holding the one thing he couldn't spin: the numbers. The room buzzed with anticipation. This wasn't just another committee session. It had the energy of a televised event. Kirk sat at the witness table with his trademark self-assurance, the Turning Point logo practically hanging behind him like an invisible banner. He smiled for the cameras, his posture crisp, his tone rehearsed. He had done this before, countless college stages, rallies, panels where he was the main attraction. This, he thought, would be no different. His opening remarks poured out smoothly. Turning Point was about empowering students, grassroots activism, and giving a voice to young conservatives. Each phrase rolled like it had been tested and refined in focus groups. Supporters in the audience nodded, and even some on the dais leaned back, expecting a familiar show. Kirk, confident and untouchable, sparring with critics and walking away unscathed. But Crockett sat different. While Kirk leaned into the theatrics, Crockett leaned into her notes, her eyes scanning line after line like a surgeon reviewing scans before an operation. She didn't interrupt. She didn't posture. She waited. What most of the room didn't realize was that Crockett had prepared differently. She wasn't planning to duel Kirk on ideology. That was his comfort zone. She was going after the foundation beneath his rhetoric, the finances. Turning Point's public tax filings told a story very different from the one Kirk spun, and Crockett knew how to tell it. The stage belonged to Kirk for the moment. His voice carried, his cadence smooth, his confidence almost smug. He was the showman, and the cameras fed on him. But as Crockett looked up from her notes, silent and steady, the dynamic quietly shifted. The audience didn't see it yet, but the setup was already in motion, because while Kirk performed, Crockett was preparing to expose a script he couldn't control. Kirk leaned in, convinced his talking points would carry him through. But Crockett wasn't here for theater. She was here for truth, and one quiet question would flip the script. Charlie Kirk spoke with certainty, weaving his favorite narrative. Turning Point USA, he declared, was powered by millions of young Americans. He painted a picture of dorm room donations, student rallies, and a grassroots wave carrying his movement across the country. The words flowed, practiced and polished, landing exactly as he wanted. A story of authenticity, of unstoppable youth energy. Supporters in the room nodded along while the camera zoomed tighter on his face. Kirk thrived on these moments, where confidence could be mistaken for credibility. He knew how to dominate a stage, and he believed this one would be no different. But Crockett had been listening carefully. She didn't shuffle papers. She didn't interrupt. She simply waited for the room to still, her silence a sharp contrast to Kirk's rolling cadence. Then, with deliberate calm, she leaned toward her microphone. "Mr. Kirk," she said, her voice steady, "you've just described Turning Point as a grassroots organization. Can you explain, then, why your IRS Form 990 shows that more than half your funding comes from fewer than 10 donors?" The pause was immediate and devastating. Kirk froze mid-expression, his rehearsed confidence flickering. A ripple moved across the room, staffers trading quick glances, reporters lifting their pens, the audience leaning forward. Kirk tried to push back, insisting that donations of all sizes mattered. But the pivot had already happened. Crockett's question wasn't a jab. It was a scalpel slicing through his narrative with documented fact. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't push further. She just let the silence work, the unanswered question hanging heavy over the room. And in that moment, it wasn't Kirk leading the performance. It was Crockett directing the silence. Kirk thought he could dodge the question. But Crockett wasn't done. When she reached for the document in front of her, the entire room felt the ground shift. Kirk tried to recover. He leaned back in his chair, lifted his chin, and rattled off familiar phrases about student empowerment and grassroots organizing. His words came faster, louder, desperate to bury Crockett's question beneath a pile of sound. But Crockett wasn't listening to his volume. She was watching his silence. Then, with deliberate calm, she picked up a slim stack of papers from the desk. It wasn't speculation. It wasn't rumor. It was Turning Point USA's own IRS form, 990, the official tax filing every nonprofit must submit. She held it up. The camera zoomed in. "Mr. Kirk," she said, her voice unwavering. "Right here, Schedule B, page 12. One donor gave your organization $15 million in a single year. That's not student money. That's billionaire money." The chamber erupted in murmurs. Reporters' pens hit paper at once. Staffers shifted in their seats, whispering to one another. Even the moderator's gavel couldn't cut through the sudden electricity. Kirk's face tightened. He waved his hand dismissively, calling it standard nonprofit practice, trying to downplay the numbers. But the damage was already done. The image of Crockett holding his own filings against him was too sharp, too damning. The audience saw it, the cameras saw it, and Kirk knew it. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She placed the document flat on the desk, her calm composure louder than any performance. The crowd understood what they had just witnessed. The story Kirk had sold for years was cracking in real time, and the silence that followed wasn't hers to explain. It was his. Kirk had been rattled before, but this was different. He wasn't answering anymore, he was reacting. And every time his voice rose, Crockett's calm reply cut deeper. The hearing was no longer orderly. Kirk leaned forward, his voice cracking with volume as he accused Crockett of attacking students and twisting numbers. His words tumbled out in a rush, sharper than before, desperate to grab back control. But Crockett didn't move. She didn't raise her voice. She let him finish, then leaned slightly toward her microphone, her tone steady as glass. "Mr. Kirk, no one here is attacking students. What I'm doing is reading your own filings. If you call that an attack, maybe you should take it up with your accountant." The chamber broke, reporters grinning as they scribbled, muffled laughter rippling from the backbenches, even a few gasps from staffers caught off guard by her precision. Kirk's frustration showed. He jabbed the air with his hand, insisting, "We are grassroots. We are powered by students." But Crockett, unflinching, slid the document forward on the desk and tapped the donor section again. "Grassroots doesn't usually come in $15 million checks, Mr. Kirk. That's not grassroots. That's influence." The moderator's gavel came down, calling for order, but the format had slipped away. What was supposed to be a predictable hearing had become a duel, one Kirk couldn't control. The louder he grew, the smaller he looked. The calmer she remained, the sharper her authority became. And when Crockett delivered her next line, the hearing would never be the same. Kirk had raised his voice, pounded the table, insisted he was grassroots. But then Crockett dropped one line, a line so sharp it stopped the room cold. Kirk's face flushed red as he launched into another defense, insisting Turning Point was a student-driven movement. He painted images of campus rallies, volunteers handing out flyers, and classrooms inspired by his organization. The words poured fast, but the cracks showed. It was more desperation than confidence now. Crockett waited for him to finish, then leaned in, her tone calm, almost quiet. "Mr. Kirk, when your biggest donors can't even vote in the school board elections you're trying to sway, that's not student power. That's purchased influence." The chamber froze. The air shifted as though someone had cut the sound. For several seconds, no one moved. Not the reporters, not the aides, not even Kirk himself. Then came the wave. Gasps, muffled laughter, frantic scribbles as journalists underlined the phrase purchased influence. It was the kind of line that didn't just sting in the moment. It echoed. The cameras caught Kirk leaning back, jaw tight, eyes darting, unable to answer. His authority, built on bravado, had been punctured by a single sentence. Crockett didn't press further. She didn't need to. She sat back, her silence now more powerful than his shouting. Everyone in the room knew what they'd just witnessed, the turning point. And beyond those walls, millions more were about to see it too. Inside the chamber, Crockett had landed the knockout. But outside, the clip spread like wildfire, and no press release from Turning Point could put it out. By the time Kirk left the hearing, the internet had already moved faster than his team could react. The clip of Crockett's one-liner, "That's purchased influence," rocketed across social media within minutes. Millions watched as the viral moment replayed in endless loops, her calm delivery standing in stark contrast to Kirk's visible frustration. Newsrooms scrambled to cover it. Cable panels led with the exchange, rolling it again and again, dissecting the legal filings Crockett had cited. Legal analysts noted how rare it was for a witness to be confronted with their own paperwork, and rarer still for that paperwork to be wielded with such precision. Political commentators framed it bluntly: Charlie Kirk silenced by his own numbers. Turning Point's press team rushed to respond. They fired off statements insisting their funding was in line with standard nonprofit practice. They tried to pivot the story back to student activism, but every attempt was drowned out by the same viral loop: Crockett's calm face, Kirk's red flush, the phrase that refused to die online: purchased influence. Crockett, meanwhile, didn't retreat. Reporters cornered her outside the chamber, asking if she worried about backlash. She didn't hesitate. If you're going to influence elections, the public deserves to know who's paying the bills. That's not controversial. That's democracy. Her words only amplified the moment, giving journalists another soundbite, another quote to headline. Within hours, hashtags with her name trended nationwide. For Kirk, the story wasn't his testimony anymore. It was his silence. The reaction outside the room wasn't just fallout. It was a reckoning. By the end, Kirk's bluster was forgotten. Crockett's words weren't just a rebuttal. They became the echo that followed him long after the cameras cut. As the hearing drew to a close, the room's energy had shifted entirely. What started as Kirk's stage ended as Crockett's. Reporters clustered around her table. Staffers whispered about the moment, and Kirk sat back, visibly diminished, his earlier swagger gone. Crockett gathered her papers slowly, deliberately. She didn't look for applause. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, just before standing, she leaned into her mic one last time. The truth is simple. If your movement can't survive without billionaires bankrolling it, it's not grassroots. It's a business. And the public deserves to know the difference. The chamber went silent again. It wasn't dramatic. It was surgical. A final incision that cut deeper than any outburst ever could. That line became the headline. News anchors repeated it. Editorials quoted it. Social media clipped it. And for Charlie Kirk, it became the one sentence he couldn't escape. The camera zoomed wide, catching the contrast. Crockett standing tall, steady, composed. Kirk slumped in his chair, staring at papers that no longer protected him. This wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a warning about money, influence, and the fragile line between democracy and control. Would you trust a movement that hides its funding behind billionaires? Like and subscribe, and tell me, where are you watching from?